People, check out this clock. It was only $3, so I had to grab it. We're gonna take it apart though and get all the bits out of it, like this battery that we have no idea how old it is. Okay. Now it's time to gather all the pieces that we're gonna need to turn this clock into a wall shelf hanger thingy decor piece. And I grabbed this from Hobby Lobby. It was on sale. You know, they got their little sales, but the original price tag was $2.99. I had this piece laying around that I grabbed from some local store that I seen it was only 99¢. I'm like, yeah, we're going to grab this. It's a piece of solid wood. Why not? I can absolutely turn this into something else. To remove the little stickers, I'm just using my heat gun and a little clay tool to peel the suckers off. If you got some glue gun and want to use that after you take that off, go right ahead. I felt like this was good enough. And here is our big piece of wood that I cut down to size to house the clock and to set our shelf piece on. We're going to paint all of these up using some Waverly's white chalk paints. And people, of course, use whatever chalk paint makes you feel fuzzy inside. I like the result Waverly gives me 99% of the time. And plus, I'm still out of my Dixie Belle white. Anyhow, moving on. We're going to need to bring in the painter's tape so we can actually trim out just the front of this clock, okay? I did not want to paint the whole clock white. I just wanted to do the front so we could decoupage it, giving it a nice clean background. If you're struggling with taping something that it's not actually straight, just a little tip, you can tear the painter's tape and do section by section, and it really does line up perfectly. And in case you're wondering why I'm using chalk paint over acrylic paint, it just eliminates the amount of layers and gives a better coverage. Plus, if you feel like you want it to be smoother, you can sand down chalk paint. Acrylic paint, not so much. Next, we're attaching our little shelf piece to the big piece of wood right on the top. And I left that bare, so this way that wood glue went right into our bare natural wood. And then I'm gonna bring in the stapler so we can pop a couple staples right in the back here. And of course, the amount of staples you use is entirely up to you. I did 3. Well, I technically did 4 because that middle sucker did not go in there very evenly. So, you know, I had to go back and adjust. And so I have warm fuzzies because I plan on selling this in my vendor space. I am going to clamp this sucker right on down and let it dry overnight. While that's drying, we're going to go ahead and decoupage the front of our clock. And I do want to let you know that anytime you take painter's tape and line up something to trim it off, if you remove that painter's tape and it's uneven, don't be afraid to take more painter's tape to make an adjusted line and then repaint over it so it is even. I hope that makes sense. Here is our beautiful napkin we're going to be using. I only have a couple of these left. Most of these got sold in most of my napkin bundles that I had, and I am lucky enough to have just a few left. So I wanted to put this right on the clock and right in the center so we could use that beautiful sunflower cluster here. So I'm just lining it up. And then I'm folding the napkin back up and just cutting a little tiny hole right in that corner. For our decoupage portion, I like to say less is more whenever you're decoupaging a napkin onto anything. And I usually go little section by little section. And I knew it was going to be difficult with this piece because I had the hole in the center of the napkin. So I made the judgment to just do half a napkin on one side and then half the other. And for those of you that are just like, Brandy, why don't you just smear Mod Podge all over the whole thing? I have found that with my experience of doing this, whenever I put a lot of Mod Podge, because I use such a thin amount with napkins, it will dry. And then I will have sections of the napkin that do not attach well. So I like to do it little by little. And if I use too much in certain sections, then we'll have clumps. And when I am trying to press down to apply the napkin to make sure it is secure onto our project, it will tear. So I did half the top napkin and used a little bit of cling wrap and gently pressed down on our piece, and did the same thing at the bottom and gently pressed down onto the piece. And I allowed this to completely dry before I came in with a high grit sandpaper. Because this is metal, I didn't want to use an 80 grit, I used a 400 grit to take off the edges. Now it's the next day and our piece is all dried up. So we're going to need to attach our hangers, which I'm going to use these sawtooth metal hammer and hangers. These are my favorites. Once these are in place, we're going to take little screws to screw in our nice rustic looking hook. So we're going to need to bring in our drill, and it goes without saying that if you're using a thin piece of wood like this, you know, it's a little 1-inch joint, you're going to want to make sure that whatever screws or nails you're using are short so they don't pop through the back hole. Okay, just a little reminder. I know you guys need help remembering things. So do I. I got your back. Okay, I got your back. At this point in the project, I still wasn't sure if the clock actually worked. You know what I'm saying? And you could leave it like this. It's gorgeous, just like that. I'm not going to. Shocker. I had these stamps from Dollar Tree, and I just grabbed 4 of them. I put one at 12, one at 3, one at 6, and one at 9. And I sealed over it once the stamps completely dried. Unfortunately, the clock does not work, even with a new battery in it. However, it still makes for a gorgeous wall decor piece, and it serves as a nice little spot to add a couple little decor pieces right on top. This project is going to have you looking at bookends differently. These are 2 wood corbels I picked up inexpensively from Home Depot. Now be mindful because they can get pretty expensive. I thought they would make beautiful decoupaged high-end neutral bookends. We're going to be using this beautiful napkin that was sent to me from a subscriber to apply on here with the iron-on method. I love this napkin because the pattern is completely over the entire piece, giving me lots of pattern to work with. We're going to need just the top layer. So we have to remove the sneaky layers, and there's several ways that you can do this. One of the easiest I find is just to tear a corner. It reveals the sneaky layers, and then I just pull them apart. Next up, you're going to want to pick your medium, my friends. Here are a couple that I have on hand normally, but today we're going to be using Mod Podge because really it's accessible to everyone. You can even grab this stuff at Dollar Tree. Here I wanted to show you that they do have these little brackets. You can remove them if you want, but I did not. Since we're going to be using the iron-on method with this piece, you're going to want to take a nice healthy layer of whatever medium you choose and apply it to where you want to put your napkin. Get around those edges really well, and then you're going to allow this to dry. Now, truth be told, this is the worst part for me. I hate waiting for things to dry, and sometimes this can take 2 to 3 hours to completely dry because I put so much Mod Podge on the top of anything I'm ironing on. When that dry time is up, it's time to bring in the iron. Now, I use this little joint because it usually sits right next to me and where I craft and DIY at. You can use whatever iron you want, and I do turn this sucker all the way up. It's a good idea to take a minute and line up your napkin before you start ironing anything on. You're not going to get a second chance at this, my friends, so take your time and be patient. Make sure it's in the exact spot you want, because once you do this, especially if you're doing it without parchment paper, see me noticing it right here? I can't play that because I was cussing. You're not going to get a second chance. So make sure you bring in the parchment paper before you do any iron-on method. This is going to stop your iron from burning your napkin, along with Mod Podge sticking to your iron, making it difficult for you to do the iron-on method, as well as tearing up your napkin if it starts to melt into the Mod Podge, and just ruining everything you're trying to accomplish. A good rule of thumb whenever you're doing this is to work from one side to the next and always go over the edges, making sure that they're completely sealed. When you're happy with the attachment, go ahead and remove the excess, whatever way works best for you. I like to grab my little finger sander and go straight down, not side to side. In the event that there is a section that isn't completely sealed around the edges, going straight down is going to give me a nice clean detachment of the napkin from whatever it is applied onto. If you go side to side and it's not completely attached, it is possible that it could shred that napkin, making it look tattered on the edges. And if you're not going for that look, it doesn't look so great. I applied the same technique to each side of these little wood pieces. Now keep in mind, you're welcome to paint these white. Giving your items a white background will definitely make your napkins pop, but I wanted to keep these neutral. So this way it looked like the napkin was meant to be a part of the wood, as you can see the wood grain showing through in these little details. Absolutely beautiful. I came across these adorable little farmhouse pieces in their wood slice section, I like to call it. I've definitely decoupaged pieces like this before, but I wanted to kind of create a set. So if you wanted to grab several different pieces kind of the same style, you could set them on a shelf or set them in one section of your house, and it would help just enhance your decor. And I didn't want to just decoupage the entire piece on these. Since we had some little sections that kind of popped out, I wanted to do something different. We're going to start off just kind of painting everything white, so this way we can have that background pop out with this gorgeous napkin. I let all the pieces dry up really well and then took the napkin. I actually needed 2 of the napkins for this project. For this pig, I went and applied the napkin over the whole top section. I left 2 of the legs white, the ear white, and the little tail white. I applied the same method with the other 2 little wood pieces, just taking sections of the napkin and putting it on little raised sections of our wood cutout here, a little wood slice. So this way, all 3 of the pieces had the white paint and they had the napkin. They just had it in different sections. So if you want to put them, like I said, on a shelf, or if you want to put them in the same area of the house, they're going to match and just kind of bring out little pops of design in your home. I know what you're thinking, Brandy, what if I do not want to use white as my background? Well, then use black as your background, or brown, or green. But the part where you want to put your napkin on, paint that sucker white, let that dry, apply your Mod Podge, and then put your napkin on. This is going to help keep your background color, whatever you want that, as well as bring the pops of color out of your napkin that you're attaching onto your piece. One of my favorite things the Dollar General carries are these glass jars. They even have smaller ones that are only $1. These are $2, and I've been dying to bring one home and actually make something with it. Well, not just something, I had an idea for this. And of course, before we get started, I'm giving it a nice little scrub down with our alcohol here. I do plan on selling a few pieces of these at my vendor space, so I want to make sure they're up to par. And here's our beautiful little gem of a napkin we're going to be using. Isn't she darling? Absolutely adorable. And for our main color for the paint, we're going to be using this ballet, however you want to pronounce it, slipper paint by Waverly. And we're just going to tappity tap 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 all over the jar. I like pouncing whenever I'm doing a glass for the first layer. It just gets it on there better than using a paintbrush, and it has strokes. If I'm going to use paintbrush, I will go over it the second time with the paintbrush and then sand it down. I did not sand anything down with this. I wanted it to have a little bit of a texture look on here. And then I made sure to glue down our lid really well so it wouldn't fall apart. Because that's the part we're going to be decoupaging. Not the whole jar, not the whole jar, just the lid. But first I'm going to give it a nice coat of gesso. If you guys have not used acrylic gesso, this stuff is awesome for a medium, especially when you're working with glass or a metal, something like that. You just pop it on there. One coat usually does the trick. It's thick and it just gives a really nice base. And I wanted to kind of cut my time in half here. Again, making so many projects. So acrylic gesso is an amazing way to go. And it dries fairly quickly. So I let that dry. And while that's drying, I came in with a nice little array of colors for us to speckle, you know, all over. We're going to flick some paint. Now, if you have a toothbrush, I highly recommend that. I did not have any spare toothbrush. I don't know why. Like, what is wrong with me? Brandy, you're at Dollar Tree. Grab some toothbrushes so you have them. And you're just going to flick your different colors that match your napkin all over this until you're happy with that. And then take some solid color. That's completely up to you. I'm using white here. And I'm just going over the raised part so those flowers pop out. And that's all. And whether you're giving this as a gift, you're keeping it for yourself, or you're making it to sell, let this cure for 24 hours with just the paint and then put your sealer on. This is just going to allow it a little bit more time to harden, and it's going to ensure those bonds really well. It is tricky decoupaging the lids of these because you got those creases. Even though we glued it in there, there's still those gaps. If you want, you can fill it with clay or some chalk paint and then let that cure. I was not too worried about that. I decided to take my sponge and just press down in those creases. And I did go over this lid 2 different times after to make sure it had a really nice seal on there. And on the sides, we had a couple gaps because, you know, obviously the napkin didn't go around the whole thing. And I didn't want it being bent in a bunch of sections. So I just tore little flowers off, decoupaged them on there. And then I made sure to take a little sander and get all the extra bits. And like I said, I did go over this little lid twice after I allowed the first application to dry. And at this point, people, you can leave this or you can decorate it. And I decided to give it a little bit of a shabby chic kind of feel. I cut down a piece of burlap into a square and then I screwed the lid tightly down on top of it. And then I took some scissors and kind of cut around, making it a little wobbly, and then pulled some of the edges to give it some, you know, frayed bits. Once I was finished with this, I took some paper that I had from Hobby Lobby and I cut the shape of a tag. If you have a tag, you could use one of them and easily decoupage the paper on top of them. I did not, so I just cut a tag shape out of the paper and then took this paint in the butt transfer from Dollar Tree. Oh my. Oh my god, I had it backwards the whole time. I was rubbing the design off. Oh my god. Okay, I'm done for the day. Those transfers are so tricky. I don't care what none of y'all say, okay? Use would have did the same thing. I could not tell that it was backwards. I fixed it though. I found another transfer and put our little tag. I did add some little fringed ribbon around the edge. I love how this piece turned out so much. I grabbed these little pieces from Dollar Tree and I really feel like there is a lot you could do with them. But most importantly, I feel like we could shove some decorative napkins in here instead of a little photo to create some beautiful high-end home decor. But don't go tossing these pieces out just yet because we're going to need them as our template to be able to measure our napkin and spare us some time. But beforehand, I'm going to paint them white because we're also going to attach the napkin onto these. Feel free to use a tiny piece of poster board and just switch that out in general and save yourself the struggle of having to paint and wait for it to dry. But I figured since these were already the shape we need, why make our lives any more difficult? I'm just gonna paint them and then we'll put our napkin over them. This is hands down one of my favorite napkins to keep in my stash. Even when subscribers, thank you all so much, send me napkins and this is ever in the stash that I get, I keep some for myself before I go putting them in napkin bundles. All I did here was pick out 2 different designs on this napkin and cut it exactly down to size around our little template that we had here. Super simple, right? If you want, you could just use a little glue stick or tape to attach these. I did decide to iron this one down. It was a little wrinkly, so this way I didn't have to worry about it sticking up or giving me a problem as I attached it onto the little template we had measured. And to attach it, I'm just going to remove that extra little sneaky layer that we have on the back here and grab some of my Mod Podge. I'm not going for perfection, okay? I'm just going for an attachment. If you want to use tape, if you want to use a little glue stick, whatever, you want to make sure, people, listen to me, okay? The little plastic hole that we're going to try and shove this napkin back into, it is not forgiving, okay? It is a tight fit. You're going to need to make sure that that napkin either goes back onto this or cut down a little piece of something to fit in there so your napkin doesn't get messed up. This way it holds its shape. I applied the same technique to a different section of the napkin, cutting down a different pattern, but this way it's the same colors, the same design, so we have a beautiful matching set. And then I just shoved these both back into the little Dollar Tree pieces, added some greenery on the sides, and I absolutely love how amazing this piece turned out. If you love the look of canvases, but you can't paint, don't worry, this Mod Podge hack has your back. You're going to need a beautiful napkin and some glossy Mod Podge. I personally, for this type of hack, love to find the napkins that have the ridges in them. It makes it look all that more authentic. You can obviously use whatever kind of napkin you want, and the larger the canvas, the more napkins you would need to use or break up to actually fit your piece. So keep that in mind. This is a large canvas from Dollar Tree, and we're going to just use some matte Mod Podge to actually iron it on. I don't want to waste any of my glossy that we need because I'm actually down to the last little bit, not for any special reason. If I had more, I would have just used glossy, but let's be real here. I'm cheap and I had extra in the matte, so that's what I'm going to use for the iron on. Put a nice healthy amount on here and let that sucker dry. It's time to bring in the iron and the parchment paper, people, and the parchment paper, okay? You're going to see me wing this sucker and not use the parchment paper on this, but I recommend using it if, you know, you've never ironed on or decoupage before. Don't start me leading you down the road to winging things. If you've never ironed on a canvas, keep in mind there's no bracing in the center, so you're going to want to make sure that you're being very ginger going over it. And once you have the ends all ironed on, flip that sucker over and then iron the center upside down. It's just going to give you a really flawless connection. Use whatever technique you want to get your extra napkin off around your canvas. I'm just taking a finger sander here and going around and getting mine off. Then you're going to bring in your glossy Mod Podge. And yes, it has to be glossy. All you glossy haters just make me want to flick you in your face. I'm just kidding. I don't promote violence here. I love everyone. Now you're going to take a nice thick layer of that glossy Mod Podge, put it over your canvas, let it dry, and how stunning this faux painted canvas looks. I love it. Let's take these 1x3s and turn them into some tags. And people, don't stress. If you don't have this laying around, you can pick these up very inexpensively at Home Depot. And the length of these joints is completely up to you. I decided to make one shorter, and I started by cutting that first, and then I just put it on top of the other one, measured to make sure the other one was slightly bigger, and cut it down. Now, if you notice, see how you're getting to the end of your board and this is wiggly? Little trick, put a larger piece of wood on the opposite opposite side, hold it in place, and then cut it down. So this way you don't worry about your little fingers getting cut. For our little corner pieces at the top of our tag, I'm using a 45-degree angle cut on the miter saw. And this piece is super tiny, so I didn't want to use the little clamp that the miter saw had, and chance it flipping up, I took another piece of wood and held it down while I cut it. And people, this goes without saying, mistakes will be made, you know, okay? It's trial and error. It's not a perfect science here. I definitely botched this my first shot, and I've cut a lot of wood, so I had to make adjustments and, you know, just work it on in. But eventually I got this. We're not done yet. We're not done. We got to clamp this down and drill a hole in these suckers to create our tag look. So we're gonna need to bring in the drill, and you're gonna need to make sure you got a drill bit that fits the size of the job. I am using this one right here. Okay, this one. And no, I didn't find the center. I just stuck that sucker right down on top of the wood and went, this looks good, and started drilling. Okay, this literally takes like 2 seconds. It's definitely the easiest part of the creating process. Once you're done that, sand them all down. I used a 400 grit sandpaper to get these nice and buttery smooth. But I do want to share with you this. Whenever you're drilling a hole through something, a lot of times the back will get chipped up. I just pulled the pieces off, and we're going to hide over this with some black chalk paint. It's really not a big deal. These are going to be rustic anyway. And if they're not, you could use white paint and just sand it down even more to smooth it out. I wasn't stressing it, you know what I'm saying? But you guys do you. I'm just telling you what I'm doing for these pieces right here. For our design on the front, we're going to decoupage these. Are you surprised? Because you shouldn't be. Now, today I'm going to show you how to blend in your napkin so that it looks like it's part of the wood. And to do that, we're going to use some white matte acrylic paint and some water. But first, I'm sorry. I think I rewatched it like 3 times. Like, why am I the only one that has to suffer through the weird ASMR noises and you guys just to get have everything muted? Anyhow, I thinned out this paint a lot. It is going to just give us a light coverage over the wood. And for those of you that are like, Brandy, why do we even need to do this at all? Painting your wood is going to allow that napkin design to pop through. If you just leave it completely blank, you're going to completely see the wood grains through the napkin, and it's going to not look very blended. It's going to look a little off. If you give it a little bit of a white hue like this, it allows that wood grain to still shine through your napkin, but not so overpowering that the design is kind of canceled out. I hope that makes some sense. Normally I would just completely paint it white, but I really want the napkin design to show through and look like it's completely part of our little tags we have here. To create that blend, so this way it's not just black on the back, white on the front, and then we have some splotchy pieces where we have that wood grain, I'm taking some of Antiques Waverly Wax and a little sponge and just kind of going over the whole piece. And people, don't let me hold you back. You want to do this with transfers, you want to do this with your Cricut and create a little vinyl piece on here. The ideas are truly endless with these little tagged pieces. I just thought it was a really cool idea to take some scrap wood you have laying around and create something different. Now, as you notice, I am not bringing that wax on the front where we have that paint. I'm just blending it in. And by the way, these little, you know, plunger pieces, they fit in this hole perfectly, and in like 2 seconds covered the whole thing up. That really saved me a lot of time. Look at that. I let these dry for about an hour before starting our decoupage aspect, but I wanted to share with you that if you wanted to leave these just like this, or create these so you could resell them and people could DIY them however you want, that'd be a great idea. Now let's bring in our napkin, okay? And if you're new to me, hi, my name is Brandy. I have napkin issues, and I also sell napkin bundles on my website. If you're ever interested in anything you see me decoupaging or using napkins with, you can check that out. I always have some sort of bundle available there. For our medium, I'm going to be using just regular matte Mod Podge. You can grab these at Dollar Tree. And for our application, I'm going to be using a fan brush. I like to use these because they're super thin around the edges. And whenever I'm doing napkins, it helps me to double check to make sure we have a nice bond to our piece with the napkin without tearing up the edges on the napkin using another product. You guys can use whatever works for you. And people, if you're looking for more information on decoupage, I have a bunch of content on that. I can link them down in the description box. Go ahead and check them out. Keep in mind they are a little tutorialish and lengthy, but they will help you gain some more information on how to do this technique. To help me apply our napkin, I'm just using a dry sponge here and pressing down. This is also soaking up any of the Mod Podge that is pressing through the napkin. And people, in case I didn't mention this before, the iron-on method, whenever you're decoupaging, it's the most flawless way to attach a napkin to minimize wrinkles. But since I create content for you at home, I like to use the sponge method. It's a little bit faster for me. I took the X-Acto knife after the napkin was completely dry and some sandpaper to get everything off. You do not want to sand or try to cut this until it is dry. And you also don't want to apply your top seal until everything is completely dry. But here they are. I love how these turned out so much. I love me some good plate wall decor. I picked this galvanized plate up some time ago from Christmas tree shops for a whole $6.99. It already has a hook on there. There is a little bit of weight to it. We are going to need to cover up this flag though. I'm sorry. Please don't hate me. Don't be attacking me in the comments. It doesn't mean I don't love our country. I absolutely do. It's just a piece of decor. Okay. We're going to take some of this chalk paint and just go over the center to give it a nice base so we can take a napkin and put right over it. And people, I love this napkin. And the pattern, it's continuous throughout the whole thing. I love napkins like this. I feel like you get so much out of them. Now we're going to also need to trim this joint down, and you can do that a couple ways, but if you're a beginner, let me let you in on a little secret. Don't go removing the sneaky layer right away with something like this, okay? You want to have room to mess this up. And I say that because we're not able to just really put a crease around this and match up with the paint that we put on the inside of here. We're going to need to kind of eyeball this and go around gingerly. I'm using a wet paintbrush and I'm taking my finger and separating it. If you wet this and then you press along the napkin, it allows you to see underneath, and then you can follow along where you have that white paint. And the reason you want to keep the sneaky layers on is because it actually helps absorb that water, allowing you to not completely saturate just the top layer, which gets super thin once it's wet. It will absorb some of that extra water, stopping you from actually ruining the top decorative layer and giving you some play as you're trimming the piece completely down. If you do not want to do it like this, another option would be to place your napkin over top of the plate, just like we did here, grab a pencil and trace it gingerly around where the crease is. Cut your design out and then put it back down on the plate. Trace that with a pencil and then paint that in and then apply your napkin. This is just something I like to do. So as I go around, I can decide whether or not I think cutting it, because sometimes if you cut the napkin down, the sharp edge will look off. So this way it allows me to kind of play with leaving that edge frayed, or decide once I get it all off if I want to trim it down and smooth it out, if that would give me a better finish. Again, it's completely up to you and how you want to do this. I just feel like for me, this helps to give me options before I just stick that sucker on there and then I'm crap out of luck. For our attachment, I just used some Mod Podge with a fan brush and did little by little section by section. I did take my dry sponge. This is just a little dry sponge that I like to cut in half. I picked these up in a pack from Walmart, and they help to just press down your design. Using them with a napkin, they also kind of absorb any excess Mod Podge that might seep up through your napkin, help to minimize wrinkles. You can use your cling wrap or whatever method you would like to attach your napkin. This little sponge trick is just something I've been doing for years, and I happen to love the way it works. You can take this next part or leave it. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to use a little bit of Dixie Belle gilding wax to go around the edges just to blend the napkin in more with the paint. And I was going to do this anyway, even if I did miss this section right here. So it's a good learning curve anyway. In case you at home also make this mistake, you can take some silver paint or whatever color your plate is or your background is if you cut your pieces too short, and just go slightly around the edges. This will help it look more blended. Just be mindful with how much you're applying so it doesn't bulk up and wet the napkin and tear anything, and make sure it's completely dry. You can seal over this if you want. I did with a little bit of the same Mod Podge I used to apply our napkin, and I love how amazing this turned out. I was recently inspired by some friends in my community to get to building a little organizer. I need something extra to keep some craft supplies, so I had these 1x3s, and I'm going to cut them down for the sides to about 14 inches. For the shelf piece, I needed to take a trip to Home Depot. I went in their pre-cut section where they have some pieces already cut down, and they're pretty inexpensive. If you don't want to cut them down any further at home, they can do that there for you. I brought mine home and cut down 2 small shelves, used some wood glue and my nail gun, and built this little gem. And guess what? This little wired basket from Dollar Tree fits perfectly right on both shelves, but we're just going to use it for the top. And remember when I said I was inspired? This right here is what really caught my eye. If you're not hanging out with us over at the TDS community group on Facebook, you might want to stop over there when you're done watching this. I'm just saying, there's some amazing projects going on, and look, it's inspiring me inside the videos. Also, people, I want to show y'all how long it really takes me to paint something. Look at this. What if I made y'all watch this? Y'all would click off this video, wouldn't you? I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that to y'all. I painted it off camera. We are going to take some antique Waverly wax, spray down the sides of the wood so we can spread our antique Waverly wax out way quicker with a little baby wipe, and just do around the edges. Look how beautiful that turned out. I did this to both sides because honestly, this wood color is going to match our napkin perfectly. And for our medium, we're going to use some Mod Podge. And to make my life a little bit easier, well, depends on how you look at it, because I gotta wait for this to dry for several hours. But since it's on a shelf and there are sides kind of blocking my ability to decoupage, I think we're going to do the iron-on method. Well, I know I'm going to do the iron-on method. We're going to make sure we have a nice healthy layer all over the top of this thing, all the way up to the edges, and then we're going to let it dry. Several hours later, it is time to take this beautiful napkin and apply it onto the top of both of our shelves. First thing we're going to need to do is remove the sneaky layers so we can just apply the top decorative layer. For this, I'm just going to tear a tiny corner and it reveals the extra layers, and I just pull it apart easily. Now it's time to bring in the iron, and I have this sucker turned all the way up. You can use whatever iron you want for this. I just usually have this sitting around me while I craft, and that's why I use that one. And don't forget your parchment paper, people. You're going to need some parchment paper. I did decide to take some scissors and cut this down. Initially, I wasn't going to. I was like, I'll just iron it. and then I will trim off the excess just by, you know, using a little sander. Then I was like, it might just be best if I trim down the sides, because trying to get that iron around where I have the sides might be a little bit of a pain. A little tip whenever you're doing this would be to just work from one end of your napkin to the next. I wouldn't start like right on the edge, go all around the edge, go in the middle. You could end up with bubbles. I find that if I work from one end and then work my way up, if there's excess, the napkin tends to flatten out instead of bubble over, and then end up with creases if I start in the middle. When I was happy with the application, grab my little finger sander, and then I sanded down the edges by going straight down. Sometimes if you go side to side and you don't have a complete connection between the napkin and whatever you're ironing it on, it can tear the napkin sideways. So going straight down just ensures that if it didn't completely attach, you can fix it with some Mod Podge later without having a torn napkin. For the sides, I'm going to take some of my favorite texture paste. This is linked down in my Amazon affiliate link down in my description box. Just click that more button underneath this video. There is Amazon affiliate link down there. Open that. It's a little store. It is in there if anybody is interested. This stuff is amazing. I took a stencil and I just taped it down onto the sides and then used our texture paste to create a beautiful design right on the sides of these. In Walmart's little craft section, they have a wood area where you can pick up pieces to DIY extremely inexpensively. These little ovals are only $1.12. So I grabbed 2 of them so we could create a little fabric decoupage wall decor piece. And truth be told, we almost stopped before we got started. These tags almost took me out. Why? Why do we put it in the front? Why is it in the front? I need to use the front. This could be in the back. Or is it in the back? Did I just do that on the wrong side? Well, there we go. We're going to take some antique Waverly wax and just apply a coat of stain using a baby wipe. These work really well to smear the stain around, and you can always adjust the color as it dries. It usually takes at least an hour for these to dry, and you want to make sure that these are completely dry before you go to decoupage onto them. Since we're doing a fabric decoupage, I want the napkin to show up, and I'm going to use this cream colored burlap that you can pick up from Dollar Tree really inexpensively. I'm cutting it down to size so it fits just inside of our oval, and we can see some of that beautiful stain pop right around it. Now it's time to bring in the iron. We're gonna need to flatten out this burlap piece. I know some of you are wondering if I was about to. Don't worry. I'm handling it. Look at me. Off camera, to save some time, I trimmed these down to what made sense for me. Obviously, trim yours perfectly symmetrical if you want to. This was the design that I was rolling with, and I'm fraying around the edges. You can take this or leave this as well. I wouldn't mind to be frayed. We're going to use some Mod Podge to do the iron-on method for these little burlap pieces. Now, truth be told, my friends, this was done for the sake of the video. If I had to do this for something I'm keeping for sure in my home and I want to last really long, I would use tacky glue and let it sit 24 full hours. Make sure to not forget your parchment paper for this. It's going to protect your iron from sticking to the Mod Podge, especially since your fabric does not completely cover over the Mod Podge. You run the risk of getting stickiness all on your iron. I like to be completely transparent, so here I'm showing you, it might be stuck on here, but if I pull enough, it is going to peel off. So keep that in mind. That's why I said use tacky glue. Here is our beautiful napkin. It's like nautical slash I got some fruit on here theme, and I've been wanting to use this for something different. And I thought this piece was going to be just perfect, and I could see these hanging in the kitchen somewhere or sitting on a shelf, you know what I mean, because it's small. I like to tear my napkins on the corner. It reveals the sneaky layers, and that's going to be important because we want to get rid of those. We only need the top decorative layer. There are several different ways you can remove the top layer. This is just one of my favorites. I find it's also super easy. I have a ton of decoupage videos down in the description box if you're interested and need more inspiration, where I go into more detail about a lot of those things. It took me a couple minutes, but I just tore out the design that I wanted to use, and I made sure that it was small enough to fit inside of the fabric. You'll also notice that the color of the napkin is real similar to the color of the burlap. This matters whenever you're decoupaging a napkin onto some fabric. If you don't want to paint your background, that's why I like using this burlap color. Plus the fabric Mod Podge is super thick and it seeps through really well. If these little perforations on the sides of your decorative napkins bother you, grab an iron and iron them suckers out. I'm not worrying about it too much for this particular piece because fabric Mod Podge tends to have some lumpy bumpies along the way if you're doing burlap, but I wanted to share this tip with you in case those perforations bother you. For our application, I'm just going to take this fabric Mod Podge and apply our napkin pieces that we've trimmed on down. If you've never used this stuff, it is super, super thick and it is not forgiving. It will eat your napkin alive. I don't know how else to describe that. It's so thick that if you don't place your napkin down in the exact spot that you want it in, there's no coming back. You will probably just ruin the napkin. I've unfortunately had that experience. So try to be mindful and test this stuff out on different things before you do it on a piece you care about. Napkins are super thin and they can wrinkle super easy. I like to take dry sponges. I grab these in a pack from Walmart and I will cut them down. What they do is allow me to press fully on our piece without having a ton of wrinkles. It also, because Mod Podge doesn't matter if it's fabric or regular, it seeps through the napkin. It actually grabs the excess that comes through and helps prevent, in my experience doing this, extra wrinkles. You're still going to have some, but it will minimize it because sometimes we use too much Mod Podge. It happens, but the sponge will eat that one up. And if you notice that one side is getting too wet, you just flip over the sponge. And I also get asked, Brandy, what do you do when the sponge is all hard and you can't do anything else with it? I chop it up and use it to paint. It's like, hey, here's my new little pouncer. The next question you might be wondering is, Brandy, should I seal over this? And that, my friend, is entirely up to you. I personally would not. If you're not a fan of glossy, guess what? Fabric Mod Podge has a glossy finish. If you apply them like this, you're not going to have that extremely glossy end look, but you will have a really well attached napkin to a piece of burlap onto a piece of wood, especially if, like I said, you use the tacky glue instead of the Mod Podge with the iron-on method to start. These will take at least a day to dry. You can apply a hanger on the back if you want. You can pop them on a shelf. They'll be ready to display in your home. Walmart sells these little terracotta pots for 97 cents each. If you're a beginner at decoupage and you haven't really decoupaged anything that's round, these are perfect to test that on. You can paint these up using a multi-surface paint. This is really inexpensive. You can grab for $1.67 at Walmart. Works amazing on terracotta. I applied 2 layers to this, and if you want to use chalk paint or a clay-based chalk paint, you go right ahead. That would also cover these well. But I wanted to show you here once they were fully dry, just how nice this paint ends up on these pots. Then pick your poison, my friends. I'm using a napkin for this piece. I'm tearing off the corner to remove all the sneaky layers. So this way we have the top decorative layer, and then we're going to do a technique I like to call patchwork, which is where you can use the designs in one singular napkin, or you can use the designs in multiple napkins, tear out the sections that you want, and then patch them onto whatever you're decoupaging. I'm going to be using DIY's liquid patina for our medium. If you're ever interested in grabbing any of the DIY items you see me use, I keep a link down in my description box. Sammy over at Unicorn Dust Design sells it. To apply our medium, I'm going to use a fan brush, and I'm taking just a little bit of it, brushing it on our pots, and then taking our little napkin patch that we pulled apart and placing it very gingerly in place. I'm using a dry sponge that I have cut down. I picked these up in packs from Walmart, and I'm just pressing directly over the napkin. This helps to grab any extra medium that comes through the little pores in the napkin, helps reduce wrinkles, and then sometimes I like to go over this once it's completely attached with a little bit of cling wrap and smooth things out just a bit. I used the same technique for the rest of this pot, and then on the other pot I used the same technique but different pieces of our napkin. You can let these completely dry and then seal over them if you want. I personally like to come back over the edges of the napkins with the paint that I applied onto the background of our piece. You can do this in several different ways. If you have a very textured napkin, using a clay chalk base paint or a chalk paint works really well. But for this, since it was pretty seamless as it is, I'm just taking the same multi-surface paint. I am going over the edge and then taking my finger and just blending it. So any little parts that don't seem to match up, they're going to blend into the rest of the pot, and you won't be able to tell where your napkin ends and where your pot begins. This beautiful tin wall pocket for just a couple dollars, and as eclectic as it already looks, we're gonna make it look even more eclectic, but we have to wipe it off first. It's got some crusty musties on it. It's not as bad as another piece I've done recently, but it's bad enough that we want to make sure that we have anything off of it, so when we paint it, our paint's going to stick on there really well. For our paint, I'm going to be using DIY's paint in the beadboard color. This is a really great paint to apply over to metal. I've had really good experiences with getting like a 1 coat coverage and being completely done with it. So I applied a coat of paint onto here, allowed it to dry, and then it was time to get to business. We're gonna get a little artsy fartsy here, people, using 2 different napkins with similar colors to create one large design. First, make sure that you remove all the sneaky layers on your napkins. So we are just working with the top decorative layer. There are several different ways that you can get those sneaky layers off. My favorite way is just to tear a corner, and it usually reveals all the layers and you can peel them off super easy. I want the rooster to be the center of attention, so I am completely ripping out the center of this napkin so it can go around the edge of our wall pockets. For our medium, we're going to be using DIY's liquid patina, and I'm going to start by placing our napkin at the top, or decorative napkin at the top, and using a fan brush to get a nice little stripe over the top. I'm going to do this section by section to try to minimize the wrinkles, as well as making sure that this napkin is as aligned on here as possible. This is a dry sponge that I cut down that I pick up in a pack from Walmart, and I use this to kind of just press on here. You can absolutely use cling wrap as well to help minimize wrinkles. This is just a technique that I like to use and I like to share if anyone's ever interested. And for those of you wondering about the napkin situation, I picked them up all over. Home Goods, Target, Burlington, Amazon, all over the place. I browse a lot, and I have a browsing channel where I do share where I pick things up and the prices and how you can budget, plan, and save for your DIY projects. I try to incorporate all that in there. And if you're ever unable to find things, I also have napkin bundles available on my website for sale at thediystruggle.com. Whenever you're layering napkins like this, always make sure that the edges that you're going to have sealed over by another napkin are completely sealed down and do not have any bumps. It's going to help to have a very smooth and flawless transition from one napkin to the next. It also makes it difficult to be able to see where the separation is. You want to make sure that you allow this to completely dry before moving on to the next step. And here's a little close-up just to kind of share with you how flawless this applied on here. And for anyone wondering, I did allow this to dry overnight completely before coming in and sanding off the excess. This way we were completely ready to create our overlaid look with our Tim Holtz texture paste. We're going to take a little bit of this texture paste, and it is linked down in my description box in my Amazon affiliate link. If for anyone that's interested, just click that more button underneath this video. The cool thing about this texture paste is you can mix some colors up with it to create some different looks, or you can use it just as it is and it will dry a beautiful white color. I'm taking 2 different stencils to create some overlays. Feel free to do this as much or as little as you want, and I would definitely make sure your piece is completely dry, because you're going to, for the most part, tape this down onto what you have decoupaged. And since it's a flower and I want it to kind of mimic off where we have a flower where the rooster napkin is, I'm kind of having it hang out there so we have a little bit of a 3D effect with this overlay. And people, mix the colors however you want, use the stencils however you want. I just created what made sense for me. There's really no right or wrong way to this process. Just be careful as you're doing it so you don't have a lot of bleed through. And if you do have some bleed through, it's really not that big of a deal. You could always take a little bit of paint and go in between where it's raised and create a solid color, so there's a little bit of separation between the textures where it bled. To make some of our overlay pop, I did take some chalk paint and do a dry brushing around the piece and around our edges. I waited another day, and then I took the liquid patina and applied a whole coat over top of everything. It's extremely eclectic, but I absolutely love it. This hack is going to help you use the fabric Mod Podge and avoid the glossy end result that so many of you complain about in my comments. They do not like seeing this gloss over their napkins. Well, I hope you're ready for the work that is going to require you to be able to accomplish this look. For our demonstration purposes, we're going to be using a little oven mitt and a pot holder from Dollar Tree. Use whatever you want, obviously. We're going to also need to break into my napkin stash. I wanted just a single solitary design to show you guys 2 different ways of doing things, as well as why I do one over the other. You would think that this is an easy decision, but it's definitely not, especially when you like the decoupage things as much as I do, and you have the stash that I have. This isn't even half of it, honestly. Let's play a little game, people. Are you ready for this? I thought it would be fun if you were faced with the same 3 decisions that I was. My favorites were this rooster, the truck, and this flower piece. Pause your TV or your phone and write in the comments which one you think I picked. Did you guess right? I can't wait to see these comments. I picked the truck. So I want to give you guys 2 options, and there are 2 different ways that you can trim napkins. One is to tear it up around the design, and the other one is to cut it out specifically. When you're working with fabric or glass, a good rule of thumb is to keep in mind if you plan on blending that piece. If you plan on blending the piece, tearing it like this is going to be your best option. Those frayed edges around the end are going to allow for any paints to come in and smooth that out and make it look absolutely flawless. However, if you're going to be putting this, especially on a piece that has a pattern or a different design on the back, that's not going to blend very well. You'll see the end result here, that cutting the napkin is going to give you the most flawless look when you're working with fabric, with a pattern, and the fabric Mod Podge. However, there's a trick to it. Napkins are super thin, and it is a rule of thumb to get all the sneaky layers off the back, so this way that top decorative layer smooshes right on down to your project seamlessly. However, with napkins, it is not always easy to put them on a surface that has a pattern because you can see through it. So to avoid that, you can take a piece of parchment paper. You can use cling wrap as well. I like the parchment paper because it's non-sticky and I don't have to worry about my napkins sticking to the parchment paper. You're going to want to flip them upside down once you have them completely cut out. I wouldn't recommend doing this before you cut them out. You're going to apply them onto the parchment paper and you'll see that they're moving here. I don't recommend taping them down. Just, use your fingers to kind of keep placing them. Put a thin layer of that fabric Mod Podge over top the napkin. Be very ginger with this, and not all napkins are created equal, so some are going to be too thin for you to even do this. I would test your napkin beforehand. But putting this layer of fabric Mod Podge on here is going to allow for our design to pop through and our paint to stick to it before we put it over the design on our pot holder and our little mitt that we have. Make sure if you go to do this, you use a fabric friendly paint. I'm just using this because it's what I have on hand and sharing the DIY hack with you. Once that fabric Mod Podge is completely dry, you're going to take a very dry brushing of some white paint right over top of your fabric Mod Podge. And it does not have to be a solid coverage. You will see here that just a little bit is going to help that design just to pop through. It doesn't need to be a lot. Remember, I said in the beginning, you're going to have to be prepared to do what it takes to make this happen. It's going to be important to use a fabric safe paint. So this way, as you're applying it onto your fabric piece, everything's going to bend properly. Using paints that aren't made for fabric, it's going to make it crusty and could possibly break your napkin down the line. When that's dry, it's time to bring in the parchment paper, okay? For real, you're going to need the parchment paper. Don't wing it this time. Like normally you'll see me wing the iron-on method without the parchment paper. Don't never do that. Not with no fabric project, okay? You for real need to cut you a little section of parchment paper that's going to cover over whatever you're ironing onto your fabric. Here's how you avoid the glossiness. You're going to take another layer of your fabric Mod Podge that you're hopefully now applying over your fabric paint and your first layer of fabric Mod Podge and put just on the back of the design. At this point, you're on your third layer and the napkin is a little bit tougher, so you can apply a decent amount of the fabric Mod Podge on the back here. Let it dry for a little bit and then you can place it right on the piece of fabric that you want to iron it onto. I get asked all the time about the heat temperature on the iron that I use. People, I use this mini Cricut iron because usually it's sitting at my craft table, not because it has to be something specific, my friends. Use whatever works for you, okay? And I would Google whatever you're trying to iron and seeing what they recommend. I just go according to whatever the hottest temperature is on this and use whatever iron works for you. It doesn't have to be this. I get asked these questions all the time. Use whatever iron works for you, my friends. I'm just lazy and have this sitting near me and I put it on the hottest temperature that it has. I'm just being real with you here, people. Sometimes I wing stuff and mostly just use whatever's sitting around my craft table, okay? I don't always have a rhyme or reason behind it. So this design is the one I trimmed perfectly, and as you can see, it pops amazingly out with that plaid behind it. This one is the one that I said most of the time I tear things when I'm going to use paint to blend it in, and you'll see that this one does not pop out or even look purposefully on here. It looks kind of out of place. However, there is no glossiness over these end designs. They are matte, they are beautiful, and to touch them, they feel like material. However, I don't recommend washing them, okay? I would only use these for decorative purposes. If you want to be able to wash it, unfortunately, you're going to have to put that fabric Mod Podge over the top of it. Projects, they're going to be 2 different plate DIYs. And again, you can pick these up from Dollar Tree. I'm going to start off by putting our beautiful napkin that I have here right onto the back of both of these. I'm going to use the same napkin for both plates, 2 different ideas, or different ideas on each plate. Make sure you get your sneaky layers off the back there, so we just have the top decorative layer, and then we're going to bring in our sponge. I like to use this to help me apply napkin decoupage to certain things for certain projects. It is a dry sponge. It is not wet. It helps to grab the extra Mod Podge that seeps through the porous napkins. This is the medium I'm using here, and I am going to do this section by section. Less is more whenever you're decoupaging a napkin onto something. I will say that the larger the surface you're trying to cover and the more you put on, since you're only doing a thin layer, you have a small window of time because it will start to dry almost immediately. So I just did the bottom of the plate first, and I used our little sponge to kind of press that down, and then I went around the outside of the plate. If you're a rebel and you want to do the whole thing and press it down, you go right ahead. I didn't want to mess that up because these are going to go in my vendor space. And as you can see here, even though I'm taking the sponge and rubbing it over the napkin, I'm doing it very gingerly. I'm not being tough with the sponge and applying a lot of pressure because the napkins are thin, and the Mod Podge, since it's on glass, it's not like it's on wood and seeping into anything. It's literally riding on the top, so it's super easy to tear your napkin when you're doing this. I decoupaged the other plate off camera so this way you didn't have to watch me do the same thing twice. Now the decorating aspect I am doing separately because they're 2 entirely different ideas. But as you can see here, I left a little bit of the napkin around the edges, and I'm trying to show you here. I get asked a lot about whether or not to paint or whether or not to leave things when I'm doing glass. So to have a little fun, I'm going to paint one with the paint and I'm going to leave one translucent. See if you guys can tell which one is which project I'm doing with which. And at the end, I'm going to tell you anyway. But make sure you do let that Mod Podge dry before you apply your paint so you don't have any ripping of your napkin. Adding the paint is going to make the design on the napkin pop out more, and not adding the paint is going to make it more translucent. Both are beautiful. For this one, we're going to use this stencil that I picked up from Walmart, and I'm taping the entire design down as much as I possibly can. Since the plate is bent, there were some gaps in between the stencil and the plate. I tried to eliminate that for bleed through by taking some of our Mod Podge and doing a layer over that. A lot of times this will help stop bleed through, and unfortunately, because there were some spaces in between around the edges, there was still a little bit of bleed through. I let the Mod Podge completely dry, and here it is, me just kind of showing you how it seals around the gaps on our plate. However, the Mod Podge did seep underneath of our little stencil, so that kind of bled into where the paint met. I don't know how to explain it, but I'll show you how to fix it. Just letting you know what's going on here. I just tap some white chalk paint on the top of here, and once that dried, I peeled this up. So if this ever happens to you, I love glass art and I paint a ton of glass. I don't always have videos on it, but I'm going to show you how to fix it. You just take a dotting tool and chalk paint is so easy to manipulate, especially when it's on glass. So you just take the dotting tool right up around the edges where you have that chalk paint, and you just glide the dotting tool right along, and it will get rid of all the bumps, all the messed up areas, and you can make it as smooth as you want. You can even make a completely different design if you want. So I did that around the entire piece, just cleaning up everything. And when I was happy with that, I then took a really, really tiny paintbrush and I went back in with more chalk paint, touching up any cracking or any spots that I felt needed to be, you know, just rubbed and buffed on out to be beautiful. To bring out our flower a little bit more, I'm taking some of this metallic paint and just going around some edges to add in some highlights. I did sand the rest of the napkin off around the edge and took some of that glossy Mod Podge and sealed over the piece. It's just stunning. For this plate, we're going to paint the center white, and you're going to need to do several layers of this, and you know, Godspeed trying to make sure that circle is perfect. That was a struggle. Mine is still a little wonky, you know, it's questionable, but I got the look I was going for. I'm then taking some of Dollar Tree's transfers and a Prima transfer that I have. It's like a little, you know, poem type piece, little saying, and we're going to just rub these right on this paint. And it's really important that you allow that paint to dry, because if not, this is not going to transfer on here very well. And chalk paint will give you a better result than acrylic paint. You can use acrylic paint, but it takes like weeks for that to actually cure onto glass. And if you're trying to get a project done within 48 hours, the chalk paint's going to be the way to go. Unless you want to seal over the acrylic paint and then wait for that to dry, but you're still going to have to wait a day or two. Chalk paint, you're able to do pretty much the same day when you're doing glass. Make sure you apply a sealer on this, and that's going to be it for this one. Real quick, pause the video and go down in the comments and let me know which one you think has the paint on the back and which one is translucent. All right, people, moment of truth. The one with the stencil is translucent. Did you guess right? I can't wait to read the comments. I had these little pink bottles in my stash that I grabbed around Valentine's Day from Target for just $1, and had this adorable idea to put a pretty fancy schmancy little napkin right on the front of these. I knew I was gonna have to paint a section white, so I grabbed my Waverly chalk paint and just decided to paint over the sticker, which was a bad idea. So don't do that, okay? Instead of removing the sticker, don't paint over the sticker, because once it started dry, I noticed the sticker had bubbles in it. And then when I tried to pop these bubbles, it was wet, so it just started tearing up. Sometimes it just doesn't pay to cut a corner. It ends up taking you longer. I peeled the top decorative layer off of this napkin so that way we could decoupage it onto the front of these bottles where I painted them white. This napkin was sent to me by a subscriber, and I think it is so cutesy and beautiful. It reminds me, I mean, it is a doily-ish type napkin, but it reminds me of the fabric ones. You know what I mean? It's super pretty. Trim out your napkin however you want. Since this napkin was super translucent and I was able to see the outline of where I had the paint, I just put a little bit of water on a paintbrush and trimmed, and then pulled it right on off. If you want to use your scissors, you go right ahead. There's nothing wrong either way. We're just making sure that we create a shape that's going to go over where we put the white paint on the glass. Then grab your medium of choice. I'm just using some Mod Podge and apply it right over top of the white paint. It's not a big deal if you go a little over and you have some on the glass. You're free to go ahead and clean that up with your finger. It should wipe up fairly easy. Just make sure you do that before you attach to your napkin, because if you don't, whatever excess you have over the white part, you won't be able to remove. It will be attached. And just for anyone that is new to me, in the event that you're learning decoupage and you have never been to my channel before, hi, I'm Brandy, and you might be wondering why you notice me consistently doing tiny sections. It has been my experience, and you decoupage however you want, everyone does things differently, that going section by section and little by little, like I am even on this small part, it prevents bubbles. It helps to just take your time and gently smooth out things instead of doing the whole section and then plopping something right on down that sucker, and you can't take it back. They're so thin, it is really hard to fix mistakes. Bringing in a sponge, especially if you notice there is some bubbling, it is going to grab that extra Mod Podge that could be possibly causing you some troubles in some sections, and then it allows you to flatten it out. Since they're pink and adorable, I decided to take a cute little wood laser cutout and put in the center. And I'm gonna finish this up by plopping some greenery on in here. These are all done. Feel free to seal this up if you want. I decided not to, just for the reveal. Need 3 of the long pallets, and make sure you glue them together and then you let this sit. I'm using a tumbling block because this is going to hang on the wall, and I want a brace away from the wall. I don't want pallets to just lean on the wall. So the tumbling blocks are thick enough that allow you a little pop out because they will hit the wall versus the pallets. And then I'm taking just a couple little tumbling blocks that I have stragglers laying around to kind of prop it up. And then I'm taking different color paints to give this a very vibrant, weathered look, and making sure that I'm drying in between rotating the colors. A lot of times I skip the painting, and some people complain about that and other people love it. And for stuff like this, because I'm using certain colors, I like to show you exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, so you at home, because you know I'm showing you how to do it, can recreate that. So when I'm doing something like this, I'm purposefully placing the paint. It is not just a smear tactic. I'm not trying to smear anything. I am purposefully placing the paint and overlapping the paint very deliberately, making sure it's dry. Then I'm taking a crusty bit paintbrush and I'm putting some chalk paint on it and scraping it so we get a heavy amount off, so we can give this a nice dry brushing. This is a little dry brushing hack that I've discovered recently that I'm in love with, and it allows me to just kind of go over and give the project a nice natural looking finish quickly. It doesn't take long at all. Then I had this trim laying around that I picked up from Home Depot, and I measured it to size. This, my people, is where I love these miter shears. Look at this baby. Look how precise and delicious that cut looks. And let me just tell you something. If I had to hand saw this with that miter box, I would throw that sucker across my patio because I would be so frustrated. And these miter shears made it all so simple. Now, I gotta thank Angela Jones DIY and Crafty Kathy for this whole let me grab a tin can and make a tin can project. I seen Crafty Kathy do some pretty amazing projects, and Angela Jones like, oh, you know, they're in right now. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go get me a tin can. So I got a tin can, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do what everybody else is doing. They're pinching the can, and, you know, they're beautiful, but, you know, I got to be different if I'm going to give y'all an idea. So I'm like, let me cut the can in half and use these wire cutters. And 10 minutes later, I'm cussing Crafty Kathy out and wishing Angela wasn't my friend anymore. Like, why did I listen to them? But anyhow, it's beautiful. This project turned out amazing. I'm glad I did it. I used some chalk paint to just give it one coat and let that dry. And then I'm making myself a little hanger, taking several pieces of twine, and then using my nail gun or staple gun the proper way. Okay, made sure it was the right way and stapled them, and then I twirled the twine all the way to the other side to give it a cute little look, and then stapled it down on the other side, so we had ourselves a nice little hanger. And then I'm gonna take this Easter napkin that I do have for sale in my Easter kit on my website. The link is down in the description box, but I'm just using the little floral piece in the egg. I'm not using the whole egg. And taking a gloss, I know we're using gloss Mod Podge, not a matte, and putting the napkin pieces I cut into sections on here. And no, you're not going to see me bring in the sponge either, because I'm not worried if this is perfect or has seams or if it's wrinkly. It did not matter. We're making this look like an old tin can that is just super cute with some, you know, character. And I gotta tell you, I wouldn't mind doing a whole tin can like this either, not just the half a tin can, but for this project it made sense just to do the half. Or if you like that pinched looking can, go ahead and make that pinch sucker. That would look really cute on here too. Put a little rope on there so it hangs, or, you know, some embellishments. However, this is just a cute idea. I am taking some paints and just kind of blending the piece in, and then I'm getting to use for the first time. I just recently got these in a Dollar Tree browsing video, but I did want to show you, if you don't have a stamper, you can use anything like, you know, the top of this Waverly can. Put your stamp on here and it just stays. And then you can stamp it on whatever without having to buy the extra pieces. I do have mine. I just was lazy and didn't know where the hell it was and didn't want to take the time to go find it while I was trying to film. Also, not every piece pressed on there perfect, so I took a dotting pen and filled it in. If you're ever looking for another spot for some inexpensive glassware, don't leave Walmart out. They have these pretty vases for $1.57 and a couple others that are inexpensive as well. I grabbed these and painted this up with some Waverly white chalk paint and Snow White. We're going to use a fan brush to create what I like to call a patch method on this beautiful vase, using this stunning napkin. How pretty is this? Now, if you're skilled, right? If you're skilled, you can just take this sucker and wrap it completely around the vase. I've done this before many times, but it can be an extreme struggle to minimize wrinkles whenever you're doing that. And for a beginner, it can seem so frustrating and almost make you want to quit trying to wrap a napkin around anything that is shaped like a cylinder. So once you've removed your top decorative layer, get to sectioning out the little designs that you want, like this. And do that by whatever means necessary, people. If you want to cut yours out, you go right ahead. My carpal tunnel can't handle that, so I just tear them on up into little sections. I'm going to use Mod Podge as my medium. Absolutely use whatever medium you feel is best for you. This is just what I have on hand, one of a few. And I also feel like it's easily accessible and affordable to most of you at home. Apply some thin sections and then start gently pressing down your napkin. Now, at this point, I personally like to bring in my little sponge. This is a dry sponge. I picked these up in a pack from Walmart. You most certainly can use whatever method you find will help you best to flatten out your napkin. I like to use this as well in the event that I have too much Mod Podge in certain sections. It will grab any excess. The fan brush I love for napkins because on and around the edges, it allows me to stick that sucker right up in there because the edge is so thin on the fan brush. Apply a little bit of extra Mod Podge and then go gingerly around the edges, flattening anything out that might be sticking up. I repeated this process for each one of the little patches that I ripped out. As you can see here, you can slightly see the edges of the napkin. I like to take some of the same exact paint that I applied on our background as our base and tappity tap 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 around the edges. And then I'll take my finger and pull that paint. So this way it doesn't leave a harsh edge. And it really just helps to make the napkin even more seamless around whatever we're applying it on. And absolutely seal over this. I do wait until the next day, so this way the napkin has a chance to completely dry, and this will also give us an advantage on creating less wrinkles, allowing the first layer to dry overnight. And you'll need 4 of these large pallets, and we're going to need to glue them at their little nubs on the ends. So this way that as we are stapling them together, we got that extra wood glue in there to make sure that we have a tight, secure bond. And I'm going to put a couple little bits of popsicle sticks in here just so that way we make sure those staples don't stick out. So once you have them, it is time to bring in the staple gun. And it's always important, people, to make sure that you're using it the proper way so we don't staple our table or anything that's not supposed to be stapled. Keep in mind that this is really thin, so when you're putting your staples in there, you either want to put it on the thick pieces or where the popsicle sticks are. I am showing you here that I did do it on the ends just to prove that it does pop through onto the other side. So just be careful and add that extra layer, or use the thicker ends of these pallets to make sure you're getting that bond there with your staple gun. Next, we're going to bring in our napkin for our decoupage. This napkin is not in any of my bundle kits on my website. It will be soon. I do have other kits available on there currently. This one will be coming in one of the kits, so don't worry. For those of you that like this napkin, I always try to sell what you see me use in the videos unless someone has given me something. When it comes to the napkins, people, when it comes to the napkins. So the easiest way I have found is to take Mod Podge, rub between my fingers, and then to peel off your sneaky layers. Napkins usually have 2 if you're lucky. It's just got the 1, but mostly it has 2. I constantly have people in the comments bring up this little trick and hack. I actually have a decoupage, a how to decoupage video, people, where I go over different methods of how to use things. I appreciate and love all the love in the comments that I get so much, so thank you all for always having my back. Now to attach a napkin, I'm just using some Mod Podge, and we are going across the whole entire little piece of this palette, and then we're just going to fold it over and press it down with our little sponge. If I'm being completely honest, the best way to really do this is going to be the iron-on method, and honestly, it is quicker for me to use my sponge method, press it down, let it dry, than to do the iron-on method. For me, that usually takes about an hour to hour and a half because I really like to let things dry with each process. But if you want to cut out all the wrinkles and all the little lumpy bumpies that this will bring at your project, then the iron-on method with these palettes is hands down the best when you're decoupaging them. But if you're piecing stuff like this, do not do the iron-on method, because if you do not have that Mod Podge on there just exactly right, then it is going to stick to that you have going on there, and we don't want that happening. Next, you're going to take a piece of sandpaper once this is completely dry, and we're going to go in between and around all the edges to get that extra napkin off. And before I have 500 comments talking about the burn method, I know about the burn method. I prefer this method. Thank you for having my back with the tips and tricks. I appreciate you. Next, I'm taking some dowels, and I'm just taking a little bit of Waverly's Antique Wax and just staining them. You do not have to do this part, or you could put these, you know, put whatever color you want on these. And then I'm just chopping them down. I could not find my gator miter shear things. They are the easiest thing to use for dowels. I am really going to organize my house at some point so all my tools accessible. But once I cut these down, there was no, you could organize them to make them look however you want. I just kind of wanted them tossed on here randomly, no real order to anything. And you can use more or less dowels if you want as well. It's really just a preference, and I'm giving you guys the idea. You know what I'm saying? You guys are picking up what I'm putting down, right? And then add whatever embellishments you want to the center. I'm just using some wood flowers here, and that's going to be it for this one. too bright, but something about the pastels in this napkin just called out to me when I was recently shopping. I picked these napkins up from Hobby Lobby. They were 40% off, just in case you're wondering where I got them from. And this thrifted gem here, I picked up quite some time ago. It's been hiding in my stash. It's in really good condition, and it's not that dirty. It doesn't have a lot of dings. So really all we got to do is clean this up, sand it down, and get to upcycling it. To clean up our pieces, I'm going to use my favorite Dixie Belle White Lightning Cleaner. If you guys don't have access to a Dixie Belle retailer, you can pick this crud cutter up at Walmart for under $10, and it does a great job. I used this before I started using Dixie Belle. And the reason you want to clean your pieces is so you don't have any crusty bits between your old finish and your new finish, and possibly wear your new finish off, especially if you're reselling pieces. Truth be told, I kind of winged this part, okay? But there are directions on the bottle. You do what the bottle says. Don't do as I do. You know what I mean? Do what the bottle says. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you figure out what works for you and then you roll on with it. I did take a wet paper towel and go back over to get some of that residue from the cleaner off. And then I took a 220 grit sandpaper just to kind of knock some of the raised edges and to prep our surface for paint. And then I went over this with a microfiber cloth to get any of the crusty bits from our sanding off. I grabbed these 3 spray paint colors from Walmart because they matched my napkin, and I wanted to, for a change, keep the color the same throughout the video. For this project, I'm going to use this one right on our house. And for my spray paint lovers, if you're going to spray paint something and then use chalk paint over it, make sure you let it dry 24 hours. I'm going to show you why in just a minute. Since I'm going to be decoupaging around this house, it's good to have a nice white background. However, I also want to add some distressing and have some colors and layers and all the things. And as I'm doing this, I'm like, no, we need to apply a nice color of chalk paint underneath, which luckily for me, I had this agave, which was really super close to the spray paint color. And I was super happy about that because I really like using chalk paint on pieces like this. And I was out of Dixie Belle paint that matched, and I need to stop by and grab some more of those paints. But one chalk paint I really do recommend if you're going to flip pieces and you don't have access to high-end chalk paints is Waverly. And you can usually grab that offline or pick it up from your local Walmart. Don't mind me just grabbing some of the bristles because this chippy brush was shedding. And real quick before I paint over the whole thing with our white chalk paint, I want to show you what the piece looks like with just the white on the wood section, and then how we have that beautiful color over the rest of the piece. How when we sand it, the color is going to pop through with the white and just give us a different level with our piece. If you want it just the wood to pop through the white, then just apply 3 or 4 layers of the white chalk paint and you'll be good. I only needed to apply 1 layer of the white chalk paint over this beautiful color because it gave a really nice base coat. If I had all chalk paint colors, I would not have grabbed spray paint, but this was the best way for me to match everything, and I spray painted the house and some of the area around the house. Remember when I said you want to make sure the spray paint is completely dry before you chalk paint over it? This is why. I did let this dry for 45 minutes, but somehow the white chalk paint still activated the spray paint underneath and it started to smoosh. So I had to let this sit overnight before I could continue carrying on the project before I ruined it. Now it's the next day and all is right with the world, so it's napkin time. I had 2 napkins here because I wasn't sure if I was going to use repeat patterns from the napkin, or however, I wasn't just using the whole napkin over the piece. I decided I wanted to tear this up and do it in little sections so I could create my own design. To start off, we're going to need to get them sneaky layers behind our decorative top layer. And lucky for me, there was only 1 layer for me to get off here, and it was really visible from the corner, so I just pulled that sucker right on off of there. There's nothing wrong with using the entire napkin if that's what you choose to do. I of course wanted to create my own design on the back here using different sections in the napkin. Now normally I would just go ham and tear off little parts, but since the design was really specific with the dark black edges where the leaves were, I wanted to make sure I was incorporating them with each section that I was placing on our piece. So to get a really defined tear, I took a paintbrush with a little bit of water and just traced the sections that I wanted. and pulled them apart. This is not my favorite way to tear, mostly because I hate waiting for the water to dry on the edges of the napkin, because when the napkin is wet and you try to Mod Podge it around the edges, you could lose part of the design that you want to hold on to. And the reason this is an issue is because you do not want to take a wet napkin and lay it down on Mod Podge. It is a recipe for tears and rips. So it's just like an extra step having to wait. Some people say it only takes 2 minutes. But that's not been my experience. That napkin usually takes an additional 15 to 20 minutes to dry around the edges, depending on how much water is wet on there. But you do you, people. I just want to let y'all know what works for me and why I do what I do. And just to give you an idea, like, look how wet this one section is on that napkin. I let all these dry for 10 minutes. And there were a few spots that still needed to dry, so I took the heat gun to them. I cheated. Okay, now, moving on. If you're piecing your own design together using a napkin or several napkins, I recommend taking the time to place them out and get a vision. Once you're happy with that, it's time to bring in the Mod Podge. Or whatever medium you really want to use to be able to do this. I personally like Mod Podge and I wanted a gloss finish. I had this on hand, so that's what I'm using. And a fan brush. It's one of my favorite ways to decoupage with a napkin. Now, I do want to share with you, a lot of people ask about these little perforated edges around the napkin. For the most part, you're not going to be able to see them once you apply the napkin. But if you want to guarantee it, go ahead and iron them suckers out. If you got to press them on down, and it will flatten them out even more so they're not noticeable and you can use the entire napkin. I like to say less is more whenever you're decoupaging a napkin or a thin piece of rice paper. And the reason I say that is because the more Mod Podge you have when you're doing something thin, the easier it is to just rip the piece. So I'll do little section by little section like this and apply as I go and then add more. This helps reduce wrinkles and bubbles. I will tell you the most effective way to decrease the chances of that is using the iron-on method. I also like to share that when people recommend that in the comments, I create content for you to watch, and I create a lot of content each week. I do not have the ability to wait around a lot for the iron-on method. It takes extra time waiting. I pick and choose what I wait for when I'm creating content, and it's just easier and quicker for me. This works really well for me using my little sponge here. This is a dry sponge in case you're wondering, and you can pick these up from Walmart or order them off Amazon. Nothing really special about these sponges. They're also in my decoupage kits that I sell on my website. I like to use these instead of cling wrap often because they catch the Mod Podge that does squeeze through the napkin and it just presses it down. Sometimes when I use cling wrap, there'll be too much Mod Podge and then it tears with the cling wrap and then the cling wrap gets all gooky and I gotta keep switching that out. Using the sponge just kind of absorbs, and then I can actually reuse the sponge later on down the line to apply paints on stencils and things like that. I'll cut them suckers up and just keep reusing. While this is drying, we're going to add on our little Dollar Tree stencil. We're going to just put on the Our Story section. I'm going to tape that down with some painter's tape because we're going to use my Mod Podge hack here that I enjoy using to avoid some bleed through. So it looks really nice. I'm a little lazy and I don't like busting out my Cricut unless I have to. Even though those vinyl pieces work really well to reduce bleed through, this kind of helps cut that down. And all we're doing is just taking a little bit of Mod Podge and going over the stencil, letting that dry. And if you need another layer, you go ahead and put that on. This actually seeps in around the gap, seals it up, and then when you go to put your color on, it just goes on top of where the Mod Podge is inside the stencil design. At least that's the theory. I'd be lying if I say there's sometimes that this doesn't work as perfect as I would like it to, but 95% of the time it does exactly what I expect it to do. You could leave this just how it is. Of course I'm not going to because I'm extra 7 days a week. I'm taking these little stencils I ordered off Amazon. I got a bunch in a pack for a couple bucks. I think it wasn't even that much. I don't even remember. Don't quote me on it. And I'm just tapping all over this sucker because I think these look like roof pieces just to create that effect on here. I wasn't going for perfect. I love how this turned out. The next day I came back in with 120 grit sandpaper, sanded all the edges off, and went over some sections where the paint and the napkin are because I wanted to incorporate some distressed looks with this piece. When I was happy with that, I took a really soft chippy brush with a little bit of white chalk paint to go over this napkin a bit and give it a dry brushing, mostly because I did not care for the fact that that napkin was not the same color as the white paint we have in the background. So this is just going to make it look a little bit more cohesive. And because I just couldn't leave it alone, I sanded down some sections to the wood so we seen that green paint pop through our base and some of the napkin areas. Now it's time to bring in our drill bit so we can make little holes here to pop in our little cup hooks for our key holder, because that's what we're making here, is a little key holder. And I highly recommend making little holes before you try to screw these in, especially if you struggle with hand grip strength like I do, and grab a pair of pliers because that always makes it easier. And that's going to be it for this piece. Seal it on up and you are all done. This piece we are creating a little photo stand. This is going to be super easy and super simple. I know people, who is this creator you're watching today? I'm killing it with these easy projects. Don't get used to it. I love y'all, but don't get used to it. You know it's not in me to constantly have these easy projects for you. Now all we're doing is just connecting the two of these palettes, and we're doing that from the front of the palette, what I usually use. So we can use the flip side, the back of the palette, to create our space to put our little picture. Now, I needed to create a stand, so I'm using tumbling blocks to accomplish that. And I know what you're thinking, it's going to tumble over, but let me show you a little trick. So if you put two tumbling blocks at the bottom, almost at the exact edge, you see how it stands kind of perfect? You take a third one and you're going to make sure that it is slightly, maybe like a tiny 2 centimeters above the ones you put in front. See that gap? This is going to allow your stand the ability to lean. Mind blowing, right? Super simple too. You don't have drill holes attached, nothing, like bam, lean in little stand. That simple. And it's been my experience, because I think I've painted hundreds of palettes, the easiest way to paint them is spray paint. But the second easiest is to take paint and water and have it very liquidy like this, so you can just get the paint, just it spreads everywhere. Super easy. If you want to dunk them, I also dunk them sometimes if I'm doing a giant video of these, just to get the paint on there super quick and super efficiently. I'm gonna take this napkin that was given to me by Spoiler Girl, thank you again my friends, and we are going to cut this down. So a lot of people use paper as backgrounds. Why not napkins, right? You guys know I love napkins, so giving you another use for them than just decoupage. I'm cutting this up and then I'm tearing it in purposeful places. I'm not going to tear the whole thing. I just want it to look a little bit dated. Nothing, you know, nothing crazy. And if you want to skip this part, go ahead. But for me, it's just going to add a little bit something because we're keeping the palette neutral. And we are also not going to glue this down to the palette. This is so we can be versatile, and if we want to put a Christmassy background, if we want to change the seasons, whatever you change your decor, you never have to get rid of this little photo holder. But to add some vintage touches, we're just going to take a little bit of the antique Waverly wax, rub it on our fingers, and then gently press around the edges. This is, now if you want to burn your napkin, because I've done that, I do that too on my furniture, you can go right ahead and do that to get them crispy old edges. But this is just a simple chemical free way to be able to add that vintage look on there. And we're going to finish this up by putting a little tiny clip on there. Use whatever clip you want. This is something that was free and I had available. And I'm just going to tape the little napkin down. And when I want to switch it out, I'm going to just take the napkin off with the little tape and switch it out. Now, please mind the picture, people. It was the smallest one I had to fit in here. This was a gift from a friend when I got engaged. We're using these two napkins and a plate from Dollar Tree. I'm going to just rip up the napkin and put the bike right in the center, okay? We're not doing anything difficult here, just slapping some Mod Podge on that joint, and look how beautiful it is. Well, it's not beautiful enough because I want this to pop out a little bit. So in order for us to do that properly, you want to make sure that you let this dry and then apply another layer of Mod Podge on the back of it. Let that dry, and then you're welcome to come in with your white paint. Yep, all the drying, okay? Let it dry. I know what you're thinking, Brandy. Why did we have to wait for the napkin to dry before applying more Mod Podge? Listen, it's been my experience that if you don't wait for the initial decoupage napkin piece to dry and you just try to put a sealer right over it, especially a large section, it's going to rip or smoosh. You know what I'm saying? Look how pretty. I love this piece. Next, I'm taking this other napkin and I really just want the florals. I love how big this napkin is and all the amazing designs on this. I also didn't want the like very edge parts of it, so I pulled them off and then made sure to rip in precise spots of the flowers that I wanted. I also decided to just leave the end translucent, so this way the center of the napkin really pops out, and then the florals on the outside are just sealed with that Mod Podge, and it gives you a little bit of a contrast from one to the next with the look when you're staring at the plate. We're gonna just sponge these suckers with some white paint, and I don't remember if I used the chalk or the multi-surface, but either one will give you the same result really. After working with both of them, I really like both of those paints on glass. I'm just taking a sponge, tappity tap 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 in all over. These again are tailor-made to something that I wanted personally. So I wanted these to be very vintage, and I wanted them to be able to show a little bit of light through if I chose to put fairy lights in here. So I left them just like that, and I also did not sand them. That was on purpose. I wanted them to have a little bit of a rustic vintage feel. Here is the pretty napkin we're using, and believe it or not, I'm going to pull the peach and the green out of this, not the blue. So I want to mix up two colors that kind of will blend with the napkin colors I'm trying to pull out, which is that peachy color. And I'm literally just putting little dots, mixing little dots till I get a color that I think is really similar. And they always look different when they dry. But I thought while wet, this peach color was almost spot on with what I ended up with. Now for the green color, I just kept it this. I thought that would work just fine because the little stems in the napkin were so tiny, you couldn't really see them. Then I used two different paintbrushes to just kind of blot on the colors, not blending them, blot on the colors in the center of these jars, and I did that around the whole piece on both of them, and I just alternated. I did the peach first and then went with the green afterwards and made sure that they were their own individual colors. They didn't blend together to make another color that would be peach and green. Now I want these to blend in, so I'm taking a dry brush with a little bit of the white paint, and before we decoupage, because I don't want any of this stuff on my paper and my little design, I'm just dry brushing over the colors that we did. And since we didn't blend them together, they're gonna pop through this white dry brushing just perfectly. To decoupage the napkin pieces, I did the same thing with the water and the paintbrush to get little strips of the exact designs that I wanted, and then made sure that the Mod Podge was completely around the middle and just on the top and the bottom where I wanted the paper to go with the design or the napkin. And then I took more Mod Podge and went over the napkin as well as it started to dry to clear up some of the edges that had went over into the middle. I just took a little bit of that water and my fingernail and got the extra off. Now we can't leave it like this. I want those little words to pop out. So I'm going to just take a permanent black marker and gently brush over them so they pop. You could use paint for this. You could use Gilding Wax for this. You could use the mica powder paint for this. whatever makes you fuzzy inside. I just felt like this was simple. It was easy. I have a lot of black industrial stuff in my house. Love that look. So this is going to just give me that edge on these kind of shabby chic vintage but yet a little bit of farmhouse looking pieces that we're creating here. I continued highlighting everything that popped out around the jar, and when I was finished it looked like this compared to this, so I really felt like it just took it up a notch. Next, I am going to add some of Dollar Tree's nautical rope to the top into the little handle of this jar. To accomplish that, I'm just using some tacky glue. I think that works so well whenever I'm using fabric on glass and stuff like that. So I am gently just wrapping it around, holding it in place, and that's it for these. If you're not familiar with me, I like to use wood glue and hot glue for the bonds. Now, don't overlap the two or it's going to, cancel each other out. But for those of you who are familiar with me, I like to do this for a long hold and a quick hold because I got to pump these DIYs out. For this first one, you're going to need 11 tumbling tower blocks and line them up side by side like this. Just want to show you that the hot glue will smoosh in between these pallets. You just pluck it out, get all them crusty bits, and, move on with your day. Move on with it. Or you can leave them there. If that's how you're rolling with it, I won't judge you. I might judge you a little bit. It might look gross. Anyhow, we're going to take two of the long pallets, and we're going to put them together just like this. Now, while this is drying, it should look like this. You can leave it alone. It should be fine. I just kept on going with it and it ended up just perfectly okay. I'm going to just set it on top of these like this. So this way it's slightly over each of the very last end tumbling blocks. This is going to be like our base, and we're going to glue it to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, or you don't have to glue it, but I'm gluing mine, and once it dried up, we're going to just spray paint it. If you're not familiar with me, I love spray paint. Now in the winter I can't spray paint, so I have another technique I use to get these all taken care of quickly and get in all those little crevices and corners. But otherwise I spray paint as much as I possibly can because hand painting these sucks. I picked this beautiful napkin up from the Christmas tree shop for a big pack. It was $1.99. You can use whatever napkins make you fuzzy inside for this. This is just my idea. Take my ideas, remix them into whatever, makes you fuzzy inside. But I do want to show you this. Most napkins have 2 layers. That second layer is a pain in the bootay. It is just so frustrating trying to find it. But, be careful. Don't rush through your decoupaging with this because it can be a little bit painstaking later. Finally, after some, frustration and struggle, I got it. See, look at that. Good job, Brandy. Look at this. So you peel off your second layer and then you just, have your one layer left, and it makes it so much easier for it to just immediately give a good hold. I use Mod Podge for this. There are other products you can use. I am a Plaid ambassador, and I'm a huge Mod Podge fan anyway, so I'm gonna love this regardless. I'm just telling y'all what I like. Easily put a nice fat layer on there, and then just tap your little napkin, and that's it. Go back over it one more time with a layer of Mod Podge. Let this dry, and this is important. You want to let it dry because this next part, if you do not let it dry, the napkin is going to just kind of drag down your palette. You can, also, if you want to just take a piece of sandpaper right away, go right ahead. I am doing that afterwards on this part. and take the X-Acto knife and I flip it upside down to go across the opposite way and just pluck the little pieces out. When I was all finished, I then went over it with a sandpaper and just kind of got all the extra off. And if you do not like this look, you don't have to use the sandpaper. Make it as straight as you want. You know, also make sure you get all your extra pieces out. Wow, I really left all this in the video. I'm like cleaning on here for y'all too. Like, This is a finger bow. I do not do good at bows. I learned this from Sammy over at Unicorn Dust Designs. Thank you, girl. I do not do bows well, and I watch her do her little finger bows, and I thought this would be really cute on here just to add over. So you're not going to find bow tutorials on this channel, just to let you know. I finished this off just by painting the bottom a light chocolate color and then going over it to get in the crevices with the antique Waverly wax, and then added a tiny embellishment to the bow. To start off this project, we're going to need to glue 3 tumbling blocks together just like this. And we're going to need 4 of these and 1 of these long pallets. And that's it. That's all we're going to need to accomplish this little look. This part is important though if you're trying to get as square as you can get. You do not want like 2 in the middle, 2 on the ends. You're going to kind of like overlap. So you'll have 1 overlapping the bottom on the other for all of these to where it's kind of like a square, you know. So be mindful as you're using your hot glue and your wood glue. So this way it is pressing in those seams, like where they meet, in just the right places. And on the very last one, I had to kind of do like at the same time, so this way when I pressed it I didn't have to try and peel it back apart on the last one, like in the little last section. I hope that makes sense. If not, you know, I'm trying to show you in the video. See how it's 2 connecting points here? So there's the one and then there's the other. I didn't want to have to peel the other one up if I only did one side first. I hope that makes sense. You're gonna let this dry, and once it's dry we're gonna spray paint these. Now I've said this before that, you know, I like to spray paint everything at the same time, and I didn't show you all at one time in the video, and the only reason is because I used different colors and couldn't put them all in the same box or I'd get them all sprayed on top of each other. I had to do these like one at a time. So this is why it's sectioned off today, but you know, I still gotta show you some spray paint. I gotta show my spray paint people some love. Look how pretty it is. Oh, I just love how this turned out. And this is all we're going to do. We're going to put that palette on the center of that square like that. And we're going to decoupage some more. Because I got lucky at the Christmas tree shop and found all these amazing napkins. Magnificent. I'm so in love with them. But funny enough, this one only had 1 layer. I mean, what are the odds? How lucky am I in one video to show y'all 2 layers and 1 layer? It was like Christmas for the filming industry. No, I'm just kidding. Anyhow, the words were not going to lay perfectly on the little palette, you know, pieces. So I decided to carefully cut them out. If you're going to do a decoupage like this, where you want the words to show, don't get too worried if your napkin overhangs or doesn't overhang. If you throw some Mod Podge like I'm doing on here, like lather it on up, once it's all dry, you just take yourself a sandpaper and that stuff's going to come right off. Feel free to skip this part entirely if you're happy with it. I felt like it was a little plain and wanted to add some twine around the edges, and I didn't get wild with it and layer the whole thing. I just, you know, did 3 wraps on each side of the corner just to give it a little something, and I just glued it down on the back. And then I'm only using hot glue for this. You can use E6000 or your Gorilla Glue gel, whatever makes you fuzzy inside. And that was it for this one, people. I wanted to use this dupe as an example of to show you why I love napkins so much. Now you could use a 1x2, but we're going to use these shims for $5.98 picked up from Home Depot, and we're only going to use 4 of them. A 1x2 or something, you know, a little bit smaller would work as well, but shims are more inexpensive and we can get the same end result. I'm cutting off the very end pieces because they're fairly thin compared to the rest of the shim. One side's usually larger than the other. Once you have our little pieces all cut, and this is what I was talking about, how like one side's a little bit thicker than the other, I'm actually lining these all up with the thick end on the right hand side and then the thinner end on the left hand side. You could go back and forth if you want, but I'm going to sand these down, and I thought I'd get a better sand after I attach these 2 little bits on the back if they were all level. Now there's many ways you could do this. You could create a box type of frame. I am just using 2 little shims that I cut off on the edges to go across the 4 pieces with some wood glue and hot glue. And if I'm being 100 with you people, I did not feel fuzzy inside about this, okay? I wanted to carry on, so I took some extra hot glue and ran around the sides of these little pieces of shim I put on the back. Now, as you can see, these are, oof, they are just, okay, look, they were cheap. Listen, we're gonna sand them down to get that smooth look. We're painting over this so you don't have to sand it, but at least knock off some of that fuzz. Wood fuzz. Don't be judging me. What do you call it? It looks like wood fuzz. Anyhow, here's my pretty napkin. Look at this. Look at these birdies. Super pretty. I got this from Christmas tree shops. I love Christmas tree shops. I think this was $1.99. I'm going to start off the wood pieces before we get our napkin and put different layers of color on here. It looked like there was some color coming through with the white, rolling with the white paint. I'm using Dixie Belle paint for the project, except for the white. I'm using Waverly's white chalk paint. Use whatever you want. Now I did put 2 coats of the white on here just because my napkin is fairly light colored and I didn't want that dark color really shown through my napkin, and I made sure to place the white in sections I'm going to be placing the napkin. I'm ripping the napkin off so it doesn't have a sharp edge. See how nice and ripped up it is all along the line of the little perch we're going to use as our guide for these little birdies. Now make sure if you're doing a napkin you do rip off the sneaky layers on the back to get the best grip with the napkin before you apply your Mod Podge and press your napkin onto your project. This is why I love napkins so much, because you can take something basic like some pieces of wood and the beautiful decorative design from a napkin and make it look like this high-end piece that you purchased from a store and all this detail went into it, and nope, it's a napkin. Some Mod Podge went into it. Just in case you're not familiar with Mod Podging napkins or decoupaging, you want to use a little bit of Mod Podge. If you've heard a lot, I completely disagree with it. A little is more. Use enough that you got a sticky base and then do small sections with your napkin. I use a sponge. You can pick these up from Walmart for a couple dollars, and make sure you don't have dog hair in yours like I had dog hair in mine, of course. The struggles of loving your animals. Now I just do section by section with the napkin and then use the sponge to press the napkin down. And the reason I do this is because your napkin is so dainty and fragile that it literally will break if you use anything tough to try and apply it. So the sponge is definitely a nice little trick to get that done. If you need more decoupage help, I do have a decoupage do's and don't video I can link in the description for you. Continue applying your napkin, and as you go over the top of the napkin with a light brushing of the Mod Podge to really seal that in there. So once it's dry, we can take our sandpaper and go around the edges and get any of those extra little frayed bits off without any problem of the napkin coming up. I even go over the project itself to make sure it's smooth, to take some white Waverly chalk paint and come back and really blend it, which is another reason why I really enjoy ripping the napkin up, because it allows me to blend the paint in and give the project a very cohesive look. Plus, I think it also creates that little bit of a sense of wonder, you know, when somebody comes over your house and they're looking at your decor and they got to get up on it like, wow, how is that made? I'm over here like, it's a napkin. To enhance the creases and the little wood strips, I'm just adding a little bit of antique Waverly wax, and that's going to be it for this one. Let's take a look at Kirkland's version, and here's mine. Project, we're creating a floral holder, and I'm using, this is honestly a piece of scrap wood I had laying around, and I was like, I got an idea. That's kind of where I went with this. Grab yourself a giant drill bit. This is one of my biggest ones. Look at the size of this sucker. And then I'm going to put 3 holes in it. If you want to put more holes in it, you go right ahead. I'm putting 3 holes, one in the center, and make sure you hold on to it, because if you let go, this is what happens. And you're going to want to make sure that you are clearing it out as you're drilling each hole. Now, if you're not sure how deep to go, mark your drill bit with some tape and then go and back and drill your holes. So that way they're all even. Unless you want even holes, then do you. But yeah, it makes a mess. All right, now it's time for the fun part. We are going to use Paint Blue by Dixie Belle in this beautiful napkin I was so blessed to receive by Allison. Thank you so much for sending this to me. In case you don't know, people, the way to my heart is napkins and Mod Podge. So I was so happy when I was like, I gotta make something beautiful with this. So to start off, I just took the napkin and kind of wrapped it around our wooden vase we're making and started ripping it deliberately in the spots that I wanted it to be ripped in. The cool thing about this project is you can use either side of the vase, so if you want to create them both entirely different, then go right ahead. Another thing I wanted to do for this video, because I always use Mod Podge, is use some polyacrylic. So that's what I did. I poured a little bit into the vase, and I'm here's me waving the sponge. Like, here's my sponge, people. Don't forget we're using a sponge. So I'm using the polyacrylic and doing the same exact technique. I have had so many questions recently in emails and private messages, and bless all of you, because I am here to help you on your DIY journey. I do go over every single one of my projects with the sealer. So whether I'm using Mod Podge or this particular project, we are using the polyacrylic, I will go over the napkin to seal it. It also does not matter if you use a sealer like this. It really depends on what your preference is when it comes to creating your decoupage piece. For my furniture, I really love using polyacrylic. I also just feel more fuzzy inside with that long-lasting hold. Not saying that Mod Podge will not do the same, but I really don't want to Mod Podge a dresser or a nightstand or end table, if you know what I mean. So polyacrylic for the furniture. Then I'm gonna take this stamp here, and this is in my Amazon store. I picked this up, and you can actually, I'm just taking some paint and kind of going over it in some areas, and then I'm gonna press it in there. If you want to use your stamp pieces, you go right ahead. I get lazy. So I'm like, we're just gonna throw some paint on here, and then we're gonna press it, and we're gonna be done and roll on. And then I sealed over the piece one more time, and that is gonna be it for this one. This basket was in really good condition, and all I really need to do was get rid of this paint on the side and kind of make it all one color. So I took it outside and give it a coat of the same primer we put on our first project. Now we're going to decoupage this gem with this beautiful napkin that one of my subscribers, Spoily Girl, sent to me. Thank you so much. Look how pretty this is, people. I love that y'all love me. It means so much. But before we go busting out the Mod Podge, we're going to need to paint the edges. Taking some yellow and putting around the edges. Oh, yes, yellow. I was happy. I was nervous, but I was happy with the way this turned out. But I gotta tell you, I was scaring myself. For the Mod Podge application, I just applied a little from the bottom to the top and pressed with the sponge as I went up in my fingers. Once it was dry, I took sandpaper and just shaved down around the edges. If you want to use water and then shave down around the edges, you go right ahead. Took some of these half wooden beads, glued them onto the sides, painted them blue. We're going to also add a little bit of twine and some green, you know, green ribbon, green vine ribbon from Hobby Lobby around the top. And that's going to be it for this one, people. I did stop at Home Depot to get a piece of wood. I was not thrilled about the $10 and change I had to spend on this, but I figure I'll get more projects out of it in the long run. Hopefully it'll all even itself out in the budget somewhere. For this project, you could really make it as big as you want. You could use as many spindles as you want. I'm making it fairly small and using just 2 spindles. Now these suckers just pulled right out the other side after I cut the other 2 off, so I'm just cutting the little tips off here. I'm going to be drilling holes into there anyway, so we don't really need the tips of them, so just got rid of that. We're going to use just a simple toothpick to shove in our spindles. So I'm looking at my beautiful little kit I got over Christmas. Some women dream of jewelry and perfume for gifts. I dream of tools and Mod Podge. You always want to make sure your drill bit is slightly bigger than whatever you plan on shoving it in the holes. So I decided that I was going to go small for this because I'm also going to create a back as far as our stable, you know, toothpick piece we're shoving in here. And honestly, you can go as thick as you want with the dowel pieces. I just knew that I was creating a backing on this and I just wanted something to make sure those spindles were not going to move. Now, these gator things, I am still, or miter shears, Lauren, you're gonna attack me in the comments on that one. They're not for every job. I do approve of them and appreciate them for like the dowels and, you know, these toothpicks, they work great. But see how I can shove them in there and then I'm able to just use these again to get a nice cut. I love them for that, but you'll see in a couple minutes, they don't do what I feel like they should do for everything I feel like they should do it for. Maybe I just have unrealistic expectations. I don't know. But another thing I like to do whenever I'm using wood glue and attaching pieces like this is add a little bit of your wood shavings. Just sprinkle it on there like Parmesan cheese. You're not going to hurt nothing. I like it. It like kind of gives the wood glue like a little bit of meat. And here's me just showing you how I jacked this up so it could sit and dry overnight. Now I'm here to tell you, if you plan on creating this key holder, because that's what we're making because I ain't said it, without a backing, it's going to be, it might not hold well. I would create a backing, but you know, you do you. As I was cutting these paint sticks, they chipped off and I'm like, oh no, I was going to cut another one. But I'm like, you know what? I kind of like this. It's going to add to the feel of our piece. So I'm just going to leave it here. This right here, this is a shim, and I feel like these miter shears should cut this sucker. Why it's not, I don't know, but I don't like it. Look at that, this is ridiculous. It should cut it, it shouldn't even be an issue. I shouldn't even have to bat an eye at it, but okay, but like I said, maybe I have unrealistic expectations. You can use popsicle sticks if you want to. I just had shims like sitting right next to me, so that's why I used it. And yes, I'm using the front part of the measuring pieces because I'm painting over them. We're gonna decoupage and we're not gonna see the numbers, so the back of our project will look nice too. Napkins do have a second layer, sometimes a third, and you can just take a little bit of Mod Podge on the tips of your finger to easily pry that up. To make sure I'm putting this napkin in the center, I just kind of marked it, and then I'm starting from the very tippy top with the Mod Podge. You can Mod Podge however you want. Whenever I do napkins, I recommend using a light, small application in a small area and then move down or outward or upward or whatever works best for you. Just small area, small application, and then spread it out. Sometimes if you use a lot of Mod Podge, in my experience, the napkin will rip because it's kind of all just soggy, it's soggy. And I like to use a sponge. This is a dry sponge, it's not a wet sponge. I have people ask all the time if it's wet. It is dry, and I use that to help me move the napkin along with the Mod Podge. I also go over the napkin with a layer of Mod Podge. I have a lot of people ask that as well. Yes, go over the napkin. I am taking some different, now you can do this in any way you want, but I am just creating a very light weathered look, and I'm using several different colors to accomplish that, and kind of just taking a brush and just wiping it all over the piece. The beautiful thing about creating weathered look is you can really just blend several different colors together to get that. This is a gross paintbrush. It's got crusty bits all in it, but you know what? It's gonna create an amazing distressed look, and I can't give nobody else credit for this. Like, I discovered this on my own. So I just literally scraped this hard paintbrush all across it very lightly. I loved the effect of this. It was also really quick and easy. I was able to distress this piece in under a minute. Aside from this, I had to give you guys like a little close up so you could see the magnificence that I was seeing. So get you your own crusty bit paintbrush and then distress away, my people. I got your back. I got you. To attach everything, I used my staple gun and some wood glues, so I know once I sell this piece, it is not going anywhere. I also put in some sawtooth hammer in hangers on the back. I also finished the piece off camera, and then we're going to add on our little hooks or handles that we got from Hobby Lobby. Gems I could have grabbed out of this patio, I don't know why I grabbed this one. Probably because I thought this aquamarine color would go best on the little roofs I have, and I got a special napkin that I think is gonna blend really well with it. As always, I like to look over my piece and see what I gotta do. It's in really good shape other than it being a little dusty, and we're gonna clean that up. But here's the color I'm gonna use. I got from Dixie Belle. It's called the Gulf, which when you type in aquamarine, this is what they give you, okay? It's what Google said. This is what I'm going with. And to clean it off, I'm gonna use Dixie Belle's White Lightning. Now, I do spray this in a, or pour this and mix it up in a spray bottle. It does not recommend that you do this, but it works fine for me, so I roll on with it. And when I have to paint inside, this is going to be our staging filming area. Isn't it fabulous? Not really, but this is what I'm working with inside, and I have sanded down the piece and I've cleaned up the piece, so all the prep work is out of the way and I don't have to bore you with that. Now let's jump into grabbing us paintbrush. And yes, I have a whole separate box of paintbrushes for my furniture versus my crafting and my DIY wood pieces, because don't every furniture artist have a completely separate box of tools at their disposal? I feel like this piece is going to bleed, so I'm going to take some of this Dixie Belle Boss to avoid that. And we are not painting this entire thing, so for those of you that are like, oh, don't, the poor wood, calm down, just slow your roll. I'm not covering over all the beautiful wood. We are, however, yep, dog hair, We are, however, going to just paint the roofs, and we're going to paint the shelves. So I put the Boss on them to stop any bleeding from coming through that paint. See how it's drying right here? And this stuff is pretty magnificent. It doesn't take any time at all to dry. And look at that beautiful butteriness. I love opening a new can of paint. There's nothing like it. Except for maybe opening a Snickers ice cream bar. That's pretty magnificent. Okay. Back to painting. On our shelves, I'm just painting around the edges because I'm going to go over these with the white. We're going to sand these out. You'll see what we're going to do later. But right now, this is how we're doing it. So a little bit of this aquamarine or the Gulf color, and then we're going to put some white on this. But we're not going to do that for the roofs. For the roofs, we are going to leave just this beautiful color. It really is absolutely just stunning. But then I don't know how I managed to hit this brush up against the light behind me and off it flew. Well, that just happened. Oh. Let me go wash this. And I definitely didn't wash it well enough or something, or maybe one fell from the sky. I don't know. But like within less than 2 minutes, I discovered a lingering hair that I had to address. Yeah. And I'm sure it has absolutely nothing to do with this one following me every single where I go and then wagging her beautiful fluffy tail everywhere. On the roofs, I managed to be able to just do 2 coats, but not on these shelves. On these shelves, they took a good 4 coats. It doesn't usually take that many, but for whatever reason, this project, it did. We created our own stain. We're going to go in with the brush. We're going to then wipe it back. And this is going to, once it dries, you're not going to see it right off because right now it's just going to kind of look like a mess. And if you have microfiber cloths, this is the time to use them. I did not. I'm using a napkin, but I also know how to go back and make sure I got all the bits of the napkin off so it doesn't look like a mess. If you're not that familiar with it, use a microfiber cloth because using a regular napkin is definitely going to leave you little crusty bits in different places. But when you're doing a wash like this, it doesn't really get stuck in there so much as it would just plain paint. Okay, I'm rambling. So we are going to let this dry, and that takes several hours because we want it to be completely dry before we go about our next step. Now it's beautiful just the way that it is. However, we're going to decoupage, and we're going to use this beautiful napkin that I have. To attach the napkin, we're going to use this polyacrylic, and I like to use this on my furniture pieces versus Mod Podge. It's just a preference. You do you. I'm not judging you and how you do your projects. And to start out for something like this, I like to kind of take the napkin and size it up, kind of figure out what I'm doing, if I need to cut it, or we're going to use another technique to kind of divide this piece. But first you want to make sure you get all your layers. This one only seems to have one, so you want to have your top layer of your napkin, so this way the back layer of the napkin doesn't come peeling and separating from the top layer. And listen, if you forget to peel it, you know what, just put extra sealant on the very top of it and dry it quickly. That I've done it before, okay? It's okay. For this next part, we're taking a little bit of water and a paintbrush, and we're going to just use that to find the center in between the napkin. You can cut this off if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. I, at the time, was not completely sure if I was going to use the raggedy ends to wrap around the poles. So I wanted them to be very raggedy and did not want to sit and rip all of it, because with a piece like this, it can be very time consuming and ripping the napkin in the exact precise spots. And I knew that I wanted the napkin to come exactly to the edges of where I put the sealer. But at the time, wasn't sure if I was going to wrap them, so the water and then pressing along the napkin to divide it was the best option for me at the time. So here we're just taking a little bit of the sealer and placing our napkin piece exactly where we want it, and we're only going to put the sealer exactly where we plan on putting the napkin, not anywhere else. And when I'm doing a napkin, and this is why I like doing napkins on furniture, because you can do the tiniest bit and you can easily manipulate it. It's not thick like a piece of paper or fabric. And then if you have to cut it off or shave it down, it's not a huge deal to make that happen. When you have a thicker piece like a fabric or a paper, takes a little bit more work to actually kind of get rid of that excess, or if you want it to curve into something, it takes a little bit more finagling. Whereas with this, you can sand it down a little bit and the napkin will kind of disappear, and using something like this sponge actually helps to just press it down exactly into the spot that you want to do. I also go little by little with the sealer. I don't pile a lot on. It has been my experience that the more you use, the easier the napkin is to disintegrate or bubble or just bunch in certain sections. I actually have a how-to decoupage or decoupage do's and don'ts video. I can link that in the description box for anyone that needs more tips and tricks on decoupaging. I also do want to say the sponge is a dry sponge. It is not a wet sponge. It is a dry sponge, and I usually only use the sponge for the napkins. I get emails and comments and tons of questions about this all the time. The sponge is dry, and the reason why I love using this is because think of the napkin as you're putting the sealer down on your wood, right? And then you put the napkin over it. Once you press that sponge down, what's it doing? It's actually grabbing the sealer through the napkin. So your sealer, your extra sealer that's going in through your napkin is coming up and connecting with your sponge, and it's actually stopping any extra from smooshing out anywhere or ripping the napkin. Another question I get asked all the time is, do I go over my decoupage? Absolutely. Once it's completely dry on your napkins though, let it completely dry out, and then make sure that you're only going over it in the exact sections that you want, because anything else, once you go to sand it or trim it, it's going to stick. Some more hours later, I'm taking a little piece of sandpaper and I am deliberately, as you can tell, I decided not to wrap it around the edges, and I'm glad that I didn't. I'm going around, look how beautiful that is, and I'm just sanding it down. And this is why you want to make sure it's dry when you're sanding, because if not, your napkin is going to bunch and move with your sandpaper. This way it does not. It comes off really clean and it's stunning. And at this point you can always go back in and add some blending around those edges. I'm leaving it just like this, but we are coming in, like I said, and we're going to sand down just to let that aquamarine, the Gulf color, pop through these shelves. If you loved this long mega compilation video, click on this one right here. There are tons more DIY inspiration pieces for you to check out. As always, people, thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and until next time.